Well, although I am the second most popular book launcher in Australia, and though I occasionally was given to a little bit of disagreement and dissent in my former vocation, I could just sit down now and say that I completely concur with what that distinguished Australian historian and professor at this university, Stuart McIntyre, has just said. But obviously I'm not going to do that because it is my ambition to rise to be the most popular book launcher. You know, in this large and diverse and varied audience, there were people who looked at my little flags and said to me with astonishment, "You've actually read the book," which I have to say that the most popular book launcher in Australia never does. But I have read it, and it's an amazing cornucopia of information, of viewpoint, and of perspective, which does that wonderful thing that scholars can do for society. It thinks conceptually, it thinks big, and this is a big book about very big themes. To prepare myself for this stressful occasion in launching the book, I underwent a sort of international therapy. First of all, in January, I attended in Lusaka a meeting of judges from all over the world addressing the issue of the basic principles of integrity in judicial life. And there were judges from different traditions. And it was an indication of the enormous change that's come over the world just of the law of the judiciary in my lifetime, because that would never have been done, except maybe in the Empire, but outside, civil law people, you would never have met them. Then I went to a meeting in Chiang Mai, also in January, on the new ASEAN Commission on Human Rights. The Asian states are beginning to talk about human rights, and civil society, whose growth and the NGOs, as mentioned repeatedly in this book for their influence and power, were there expressing deep concerns and anxiety about whether this thing would work. 2 weeks ago, I went to a conference in Paris, which was celebrating work that had been done 30 years ago on one issue which is explored in the book, and that is, how do you regulate informatics? How does the world regulate the internet? Should it even try? Should we just lie back there and accept that there will be downsides, but that overwhelmingly it's been a very good development for information, views, discordant views in society that never hears them? And more recently, most recently, I went to a most interesting and somewhat depressing meeting in Utrecht in the Netherlands on religion and AIDS. It was very interesting because it involved the interface of people who had the problem of the book in dealing with one of the main themes of this book, which is the influence of pathogens in our world, Asian flu, swine flu, HIV, and how the world can respond to those pathogens in an effective and powerful way in order to turn them around and stop them spreading and stop the infections. The meeting was all right on the first day, but on the second day, when the men in frocks walked around shouting loudly about the peril of sin and the wickedness of vice, I knew that we didn't really have them on board on the efforts to the spread of HIV, and that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and that work is continuing. So this is a book that looks at essentially where we're at. Essentially, Joe Camilleri and Jim Falk begin, as Stuart has said, at the very beginning, and then they come right up to the current time and the GFC and the problems that we've had in the last few years. I also began at the beginning recently, I don't know if any of you have done this, the National Geographic in the United States advertised for people to apply to analyse their DNA. Have any of you done it? And you send in, you put a little cotton bud in your mouth and you wrap it around, and then you send it in, and you get back an analysis of who your ancestors were 50,000 years ago. Everyone in this room had ancestors 50,000 years ago. And this is a point that is made very vividly in this book. Everyone here is the product of the loves and hates and energy and sex and violence and war, of everything that has gone on in human existence. And it told me the unsurprising fact that my ancestor, like all of yours, began in Africa and then went up to the Middle East. And then there are markers that show where your people went. And mine turned left and they went up into Europe, and then they went up into the British Isles. And like about 60% in the British Isles and 91% in Ireland, they are people who took that route. And so this is where we sprang from. Very interesting tale, and it's told in this book, and this is where we are. And what these two authors basically tell us in this book is, it's an amazing story, but you can conceptualize it by dividing things into epochs. And so they divide the modern era into the epoch of what they call the modern age, which began at the medieval times, extended with a great burst in the second part of it in the 19th century, and then in the most miraculous and amazing way has had mind expansion of a quite unique and unprecedented kind in the last 60 or 70 years, which is exactly my lifetime. And they point out that in my lifetime, astonishing developments have happened, and it's all been compressed in this very short space. Thinking of the 50,000 years back and the millennia before that, it is an amazing thing what we have lived to see. And I don't know whether they are optimistic or pessimistic. I was flicking to the end, hoping I would come out of the book knowing, do we have a future? Is there a future? But I don't know, because we don't know. And the book, I do have to tell you quickly the chapters, because they really are the chapters that analyse how we've got here. There's a chapter, relevantly, on the economic condition, and that we've been, as Stuart has mentioned, as the modern economy right up to the GFC. There's a chapter on the biosphere, acid rain, the ozone depletion, global warming. We know the problems, or at least we think we know some of the problems, and that there are problems is undoubted. There's the information flows, which took me to the OECD in Paris. There's the pathogens on AIDS, which will take me next week to New York. There's insecurity and the global problems of terrorism and responding to global warfare and nuclear arms. And then they come to the last chapters, and they are addressed to how we are coping with this. Now, we have made very amazing developments in the last few decades. I mean, if you think of it, how could we have got by in dealing with these global problems without the institutions of the United Nations? When you hear those horrible and ignorant people criticising multilateral organisations for the whole world and saying we can just deal with these issues through our great and powerful friends, that's old talk, and it has to be abandoned and stopped and put down, because we could not cope with these issues without multilateralism and without the world being engaged. And there are problems with the world being engaged, because many in the developing world say, well, it's all very well for you who have reaped the whirlwind of global warming, telling us to be well behaved when we still have some catching up to do.